I don't get slides, so you'll just have to stare at the logo here. My name is Mitch Mayne, and I am an openly gay, active Latter-day Saint. Usually that gets a few eyebrow raises in the room. I joke that it's like anywhere I go kind of in life, I'm often either the only gay guy in the room or the only Mormon in the room, and I'm pretty much assured that I'm going to be the only gay Mormon in any room that I enter. I am a lifelong Mormon. I was born into the church. I was raised in Idaho. Idaho, for those of you that don't know, is actually more Mormon per capita than Utah is. Sort of the joke inside the faith is we say that Idaho is more Utah than Utah. In September of 2011, as Cathy noted, I was asked to serve as executive secretary in the bishopric, which is the ecclesiastical leadership of a local ward here in San Francisco. And what made that interesting is I was not asked to take that role in spite of the fact that I was gay, but I was asked to take that role likely because I'm gay. You see, one of the things that I was asked to accomplish while I served in this capacity was to begin to outreach to LGBT Mormons throughout the Bay Area as part of a new initiative by my bishop, Don Fletcher, to throw the doors open to everyone and welcome LGBT members back into their family of faith, regardless of where they were in their personal lives. To a lot of folks, this initiative came as a big surprise. Because the perception out there is that LGBT people are pretty much just routinely excommunicated from the Mormon faith without question, unless they choose to live a life of celibacy. But while the doctrine of the church still holds that marriage is only recognized between one man and one woman, our policy does not dictate that we excommunicate LGBT individuals. So, when we take a leadership role inside the Mormon Church as a bishop, which is the head of a congregation, or a stake president, which is the head of a group of congregations, we're given this handbook of instructions, if you will, that outlines all of the policies. And it's not particularly big. It's maybe a couple hundred pages. And there's a lot of flexibility given to local leaders to administer and minister to their congregations in the best way that they see fit. And that can be a really good thing, because sometimes you get bishops like Don Fletcher who are informed and compassionate and understanding. But it can also be troubling, because sometimes you don't get bishops like that. So what you see across the Mormon landscape is a little bit of an inconsistent experience, depending on what kind of local leadership that you have. Excuse me. Inside the handbook, when it comes to disciplinary trials, which are usually trials that lead to excommunication, there are two columns. One column is called when a disciplinary trial is mandatory. And in that column, it houses some pretty difficult things, child molestation, incest, murder, that we all probably agree should be looked at a little bigger level. Then there's another much longer column called when a disciplinary council may be necessary. And on that very long list are included things like marital infidelity between heterosexual couples and homosexual activity. So when I took the calling, as you can imagine, the floodgates kind of opened, and I began to hear stories from LGBT Mormons around the country. And I can't underscore enough how agonizing these stories were to hear. A lot of times they were married men or women who had known their entire lives that they were gay or lesbian, and had gone ahead and married somebody of the opposite gender in the hopes that over time they would change, or they had been told that they would change. And here they were midlife with children, sometimes with grandchildren, and that change never happened. Single LGBT Mormons who wanted desperately to return to their family of faith, because as Caitlin mentioned, our religion, our faith, isn't just about something we do for 3 hours on Sunday. It is very much a culture. And when we extract ourselves from that culture, we lose often our families, we lose our friends, and it changes our life trajectory, and often not in great ways. And of course, the other group that I heard from were parents of LGBT Mormon youth, such as Wendy, who you'll hear from a little bit later. Of all of the stories that I heard, the struggle of the LGBT Mormon youth became of particular interest to me. You see, I knew what it was like to be that 12-year-old gay kid sitting inside church on Sunday and looking out across the Mormon landscape and not seeing myself anywhere. I knew what it was like to be that 12-year-old gay kid and to hear the messages inside church, sometimes explicitly telling me that I was not who God wanted me to be. My own adolescence was very troubled. I tried desperately to change myself. Praying, fasting, meditation, anything that I could use to become who I thought God wanted me to be. And of course I wasn't successful. When I was 16 years old, I told my parents that I was gay. And the first words out of my mother's mouth to me were, "It would have been better for me if you had been born dead than gay." When I tell that story to a room full of Mormons, there are gasps. When I tell that story to a room full of LGBT people, there's just understanding silence. What I came to realize over time was that those were not the words of a woman who hated her gay son. Those were the words of a Mormon mother who was absolutely terrified because she had no idea how to parent a gay child. What astonishes me, I guess, is that 3 or so decades later, we still have that identical scenario playing out in Mormon households across the country, with sometimes absolutely devastating results. As I mentioned, I began hearing from these families of LGBT kids, and the good news is that when they reached out to me, I actually was equipped to help. I had met Dr. Caitlin Ryan about a year before I took my calling. I met her in her office, and she presented her work to me, some of which you've just seen. And inside Mormonism, we often speak of experiencing a testimony of truth when we hear it. And when Caitlin presented her work to me, I definitely experienced a testimony of truth of the Family Acceptance Project work and how it can help keep our LGBT Mormon youth safe. As I listened to Caitlin, it was almost as if I was hearing my own story being parroted back to me, the rejection and the risk that rejection imposes on youth. And I recognized that this was a way out for so many Mormon parents who feel, like my mom did, that she was compelled to choose between her child and her church. You'll hear Wendy's story in the film in a few minutes, and this is another example of the sort of mental discord that parents have to go through inside Mormonism. I want to talk a little bit about the cultural shift that I mentioned taking place inside Mormonism. This is one in which traditional Mormons, regular moms and dads who push baby carriages and drive Suburbans and live in cul-de-sacs, are beginning to think differently about the LGBT topic and specifically about how we respond to LGBT youth. Since 2011, when I took my calling, in fact, kind of a funny story that I like to tell is, in 2011, if you were to Google the term gay Mormon, you would have gotten a handful of kind of obscure references, but nothing major. If you go out to Google or use on your phone right now and Google gay Mormon, you're going to get page after page after page after page of story, of humans, of places to go for resources to help. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that it's probably close to 20 or 25% of our Mormon faith at this point that is beginning to respond and think differently about the LGBT topic. And I don't think it's an overstatement to say that collectively the goal of us who belong in that 20 to 25% is to live in a world where supportive Mormon parents are the norm and not headline material. So over time, I have seen a shift in who is reaching out to me for help. Once upon a time, it was LGBT Mormons, moms like Wendy. But now we have informed groups all over social media where those folks are going to find help. Instead, what I'm seeing is an increased interest from local congregational leaders, from bishops, from stake presidents, from stake high councilmen, who want to understand how they can replicate what we've done here in San Francisco and throw the doors open to anyone and become a welcoming congregation, and as part of that, keep our LGBT youth safer. At a local level inside the church, there isn't much we can do to change doctrine, and there isn't a whole lot that we can do to change policy, but there is a lot that we can do to change the Mormon culture. Part of that change includes the Family Acceptance Project, keeping our kids safer and helping leaders and parents understand what behaviors harm their LGBT youth and which ones keep them safe. Inside Mormonism, and aptly the title of the film that you're about to see, is we believe that families are forever. That means these relationships aren't just ones that we carry with us here in this life, but these are relationships that we carry with us into the eternities. So my mom is going to be linked to me for the rest of my soul existence, not just this existence. These relationships are fundamental and a cornerstone of our belief system, and so very important to us, which makes it critical that we get it right with our gay kids. I've seen the Family Acceptance Project work in action. When Wendy reached out to me, that was my immediate go-to, and you'll hear more about that. I've not only seen it with the Montgomerys, but I've also seen it with other families. But I think what's been most interesting to me is to see how the work has changed the hearts and minds of traditional Mormons, of local leaders, who begin to understand that just maybe the way that they have come to understand what it means to be gay isn't exactly right. And I think the last thing that I want to leave you with is, I talked to you a little bit about my testimony of the Family Acceptance Project work, and I think the best part about the Family Acceptance Project work as a Mormon is it doesn't require that we change our doctrine. It only requires that we live it. Thank you.
Good morning. So my name is Wendy Montgomery. I am really honored to be here, sitting here with some of my very favorite people. You're going to hear a lot of our stories, so I'm going to keep my remarks really brief. I was born and raised Mormon, very conservative, devout, faithful, multi-generational, pioneer stock, pushed handcarts across the plains Mormon family. I willingly and happily did everything my church asked me to do. I never questioned, I never doubted. I had no context for anything LGBT related. All I knew was that God considered it an abomination, that it was evil and wrong, and that AIDS was God's punishment to the homosexual community. So fast forward to Super Bowl Sunday 2012, and my then 13-year-old son came out to us, and it turned my neatly ordered Mormon world upside down. It pulled the rug out from under our feet in a big way. There was never a moment, not even a second, where we wondered if we could still love him or accept him. My question came from, how do I do this as a Mormon? And my pain came from feeling like I was being forced to choose between the child that I loved and the God that I loved. And I didn't know how to do that. If forced into a corner, it was my son, 100 times over. But I didn't want to have to be forced into that corner. I mourned as if my son had died. Yet he was still this amazing, vibrant, beautiful kid. You will see him. He is so cute, says the mother. But I sobbed, I raged, I bargained with God. The intensity of my emotions scared me. I didn't know it was possible to feel an emotional pain so deeply it became physical pain. And I realized that I was mourning my path for him, not his path. And that it was my selfishness that was driving my pain. So I threw myself into learning about homosexuality and how to help him and how to support him the best that I could. I read Mormon sources, non-Mormon sources. The Mormon sources were horrible. There was nothing good. The message I got was that my son was broken in an irreparable way and that he would not be fixed until he was dead. And then he would be made straight, which was the perfect way. So, needless to say, these were really, really dark days. And I am so grateful that Mitch's story that he told you made national news, because I found his story and reached out to him, and he contacted me back, and he was a lifeline to this drowning mother. I love him like my brother. He immediately sent me Caitlin Ryan's book, Family Acceptance Project booklet, Support of Families, Healthy Children. And I just sobbed, because here was the hope that I was looking for. And hope is a powerful thing. It seamlessly bridged religion and science. It showed families like mine how to completely support and love their children without giving up deeply held beliefs. I am so grateful for her work. One of the questions that we get asked a lot is, why did we agree to do the film and, kind of put our life out there publicly? I can't tell you what I would have given for a story like ours 3 years ago. I looked everywhere for it and I couldn't find it. I saw 2 different scenarios when a Mormon child came out. I saw the family shove him back in the closet, which was not an option for us, and I think is a horrible thing to do. Or I saw the entire family leave the church in support and solidarity of their child, which I have been tempted to do often. But at the end of the day, that didn't feel right for me either. My son no longer attends. Very rarely does he go, which he has our complete blessing. It's a spiritually unsafe place for him right now. My husband and I still attend, and it's really difficult. But we agreed to do the film because I know what it's like to feel alone, and that's horrible. And I don't want these families to feel that way. And by us telling our story, I'm hoping that it empowers other families to do the same. I've been unprepared for the attention that we've received from the film and for publicly advocating for our son. As Dr. Ryan mentioned, the film's been shown all over the country. It's been shown internationally as far as Mumbai, India, and Brisbane, Australia. It'll be shown in Turkey, as she mentioned. It's won dozens of awards. I don't say any of this to brag, quite the opposite. Actually, I find it absolutely shameful that stories like ours of a Mormon family that just accepts and loves their child are so rare and noteworthy to garner such attention and praise. I'm just doing what I signed on to do when we agreed to become parents. I'm just loving him. I feel awkward and uncomfortable with the attention because I'm just being a mother. And I can't wait for the day when Mormon kids come out to Mormon parents and they are loved and embraced routinely. So stories like ours are boring and commonplace in their frequency of occurrence. But because today is not that day, and I don't see it in the foreseeable future, that's why we need Dr. Ryan's work. What she does is life-saving. I have seen it in my own home. There were nights I was afraid to leave my son alone because he was so suicidal. And this was after he knew he had our 100% love and acceptance. Religion seems to be the last bastion that has to be crossed in the LGBT world. So the work that Dr. Ryan is doing is critical, and it's life-saving, and it needs to be out there in every home, whether it's a Mormon home, Catholic, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, it doesn't matter. Her work needs to be out there. And I'm so grateful for what she's done. Thank you.
humbling to be sharing this panel with my brothers and sisters in faith. And I want to start with praise for the groundbreaking and game-changing work that the Family Acceptance Project has done to move from morality-based conversations to health and well-being conversations, amassing positive proof that this work saves lives. As you were speaking, Caitlin, I wrote down support equals protection. That was your language. And what arose for me in the medical model is inoculation. Yes, prevention to a degree of, using the medical model, truly, we can eradicate suicide in this population. Love is a vaccine. Oh, I'm Rabbi Debra Kolodny. And in my tradition, when we praise, we sing. So, indulge me for a moment. This word just means praise. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. My hat's off to all of you. I'm here to talk about the history of queer engagement in religion, and also to talk a little bit about the future. In the midst of this incredible work going on in conservative communities, it's important to remember that this work isn't brand new. In fact, MCC, the first LGBTQ Christian denomination, or actually considers itself trans tradition, was founded in 1968, and I don't have math anxiety, so I know that that was 47 years ago. Almost 50 years ago, LGBTQ people have been asserting themselves in faith arenas. I want to take a little poll, because in addition to singing, it's in my contract with the Holy One of Blessing that participation is part of every experience that I'm involved with. So, please raise your hand if you were raised in what you would consider to be a religious or spiritual home. Raise your hand. And now, please raise your hand if in that home you went to religious services more than once a month or more. Once a week or more. Now, raise your hand if you felt wounded by that religious tradition that you were raised in. Okay. There seems to be, in this statistically insignificant sampling, that there's a large correlation between religious experience and youth and wounding. Next set of questions. How many of you consider yourself to be religious today in a way that you are engaged with a faith community? Raise your hand. Look around the room, please. Look around the room. So not even going to ask the questions about do you go monthly or weekly. In addition to suicide and self-medication and drug abuse and risky sexual behaviors, which Caitlin spoke about earlier, there's also the risk of loss of faith and loss of faith community. Now, many of us who are wounded don't experience that as problematic because we build up defenses and we have judgments about religion that we left. And so it doesn't seem like it's a problem. An invitation to ponder, though, that surveys show that people who are engaged in religious community live longer. They also show that people who sing live longer, and there's a lot of singing that goes on in faith communities. I put this forth so that you can internalize that this story is not just outside of you, it's also your story. And to think after this gathering, this brief conversation is over, what the implications are for you, as well as millions of other LGBT people. All right, a little context. As I said, MCC began in 1968. In 1971, the Unitarian Universalist Association began teaching youth about gay issues. 1971. Progressive faith communities have been on this for a while. In 1972, the United Church of Christ became the first mainline Protestant denomination to ordain openly gay clergy. In 1997, jumping forward over 25 years, Al-Fatiha was founded by Faisal Alam, the first organization for LGBTQ Muslims. In 2001, Simcha Dubowski produced the film Trembling Before God, where he interviewed lesbian and gay Orthodox Jews. Almost all of them had their faces unexposed about the pain that they felt in relationship to their very high religious observance and their fear of being rejected by their families. 2001, that was a game changer in the Jewish Orthodox world. Total game changer. So I'll tell a little anecdote about how that's true. I sit on the Board of Rabbis in Portland, Oregon, where I live. First of all, it's a miracle that there are Orthodox rabbis who sit with us, because that's very uncommon, because to sit with people who wouldn't be considered rabbis in the Orthodox tradition, myself, a queer woman amongst them, not done so much. So we had a gay marriage initiative, or a freedom to marry initiative in Oregon, and so I brought to the table, let's, as a Board of Rabbis, support this work. So, of course, we're having the conversation on the substance, and I start having a theological, scripturally based conversation with one of the Orthodox rabbis. And I won't tell you his name, but he says to me, Rabbi Debra, because he's very respectful, your scriptural analysis is totally sound. You're using the tools of our tradition. Unfortunately, I'm not able to say that from the pulpit myself. I'm not able to agree with you publicly. But here, and he whips out his wallet, this is my aunt and her wife. So we have a moment where very ultra-conservative communities within the Jewish world, 2001, 14 years ago, could not even speak that it was acceptable to have an LGBT or Q relative. And here's an Orthodox rabbi showing me with pride and love and affection his aunt with her wife. There's more stories I can tell you about the past, but I want to spend a little bit of time here with you talking about the future and where the intersection of LGBTQ lives and faith is going. First of all, there are some communities that aren't necessarily easily embraced by the rubric or the paradigm that is so very, very useful in conservative communities, which articulates that I'm going to love my lesbian or gay child because they can't help it, they have no choice. They're born that way. Which I totally agree with. We are born this way. Yet for people like myself, who is bisexual, and for people like my spouse, who's genderqueer, we don't fit in that rubric. We just don't fit. I have had a Reform rabbi who himself was a cisgender straight man, but he was serving an LGBT Jewish congregation, say to me, it's fine for lesbian and gay people, but you're bisexual, you really have to be with a man. This man was a rabbi serving a queer congregation, and he says this to me. Woo! Hi, David.
Hello, dear. Hello, everybody.
Hi, David.
That's my cousin. So you can imagine the amount of terrain we have to traverse still in our conversation around those of us for whom there isn't a simple, they can't help it, they're born this way, I have to support my child or my niece or my nephew or my aunt or my uncle. There are many religious rubrics which actually are incredibly helpful on this, but we're not a panel on theology, so you can ask questions about that later if you want. I'm not going to go into it. I say this because studies say that the bisexual youth have the highest level of suicide and suicide attempt of all of the LGBT constellation, the highest incidence of substance abuse, and the highest incidence of articulated lack of family support. They report, and so that the statistics are there. Only 44% of bisexual youth are out to their family. 68% of lesbian and gay youth are out to their family. That's a huge variation, huge variation. 57% of bisexuals are out at school, 72% of lesbian and gay youth are out at school. Bisexual youth report being trivialized and delegitimized in their families Their parents say to them, I could deal with it if you were lesbian or gay, just choose. Delegitimized by their peer group, who say, choose. A whole host of other diminishments are thrust upon us. Confused, indecisive, seeking attention, promiscuous. Bisexual youth report only 9% feel accepted in their LGBT peer community. 9%. Wow. So, work to be done still. Coming up with contexts and paradigms and rubrics that are supportive. And, an easy one, although I hold the theology for later, is love is love. And I actually think the model that Caitlin works with, which moves into morality and inoculation against these, the potential suicide or self-medicating behaviors, transcends these issues. And so it's perfectly applicable. The other forward momentum issue that I want to bring up is that LGBTQ leaders of faith are starting to move out of the conversation which is just about faith. So, for example, Neharim, the organization that I'm running right now, is going to have a conference in October of LGBT clergy looking at how we can activate our minions and ourselves around the Black Lives Matter movement. We kind of won on marriage, and marriage was a huge, huge container for queer faith leader work. For those of us in progressive faith communities, not the Mormon environment, but the 90% of the Jewish world, the Unitarian world, the UCC world, the Presbyterian world in many sectors. Oh, there are 37 welcoming movements right now, by the way. So, in terms of hope, I just want to say that, remember, 50-year trajectory. In 50 years, the entire progressive faith world has transformed. I predict in much less than 50 years, the Mormon world will change as well. So the opportunity is here for us to use our prophetic voices and our power and our millions of minions on current issues of the day that really transcend our own identity politic. Intersectional work it's a phrase that is bandied about in all of the LGBTQ environments that I find myself, and interestingly enough, so much more rhetoric than there is action. So we're at a moment in the world where there is still this very basic fundamental love message that we need to work on, and there's also an opportunity for us to get out of our box and take leadership on issues of the day that affect so much more than our own constituency. Thank you for having me.